Hi, I'm Jeff Ray, your host for Economic Outlook. Welcome to our show, where each week we take a deep dive into the regional economy and the people, the companies, the communities, and the projects that are helping our region grow. The COVID pandemic impacted every industry, but likely none as significantly as the arts community. Today, we'll take a closer look at how the arts have navigated this challenging year, what actions they've taken to help survive, and how the plan to emerge post-pandemic looks. Coming up on Economic Outlook. The arts are integral to the social, civic, and economic well-being and vitality of our nation, state, and region. But arts and culture have experienced significant economic setbacks from COVID-19. Across the spectrum of artistic and creative endeavors, restrictions on gatherings, changes in consumer behavior, and severe unemployment have taken a devastating toll on this sector. Joining me today, though, for a conversation about how those entities have navigated this past year and how they're ready to emerge post-pandemic are Aaron Nichols, the Executive Director of South Bend Civic Theater, Julie Hirschberger, the owner and operator of Ignition Music Garage, and Craig Gibson, the Executive Artistic Director at Premier Arts. Just one other note before we get started, here at WNIT, we're respecting social distancing, and as such have both our hosts and our guests joining us today virtually instead of in person. Guys, thank you for joining me today. Really appreciate the chance to sit down with each of you and kind of have an important conversation today.
My pleasure, thank you.
So, just maybe to help frame the conversation a little bit first, for those who are unfamiliar with, maybe who you are or what you do, how about it? We'll just go around real quick with just a quick introduction. So, Aaron, let me come your way for somebody who doesn't know South Bend Civic. What is South Bend Civic?
Sure. South Bend Civic Theater is a community theater based here downtown South Bend. We have a beautiful 100-year-old historic building right here on Main Street. We've been in operations for over about 64 years now, and we serve over 20,000 patrons a year. We have about 800 volunteers every year, and we produce between 12 and 14 productions each year. In 2019, before the crisis, we had over 200 events in that calendar year. So we're a very busy downtown. I call it kind of an anchor cultural organization here in South Bend.
Great. Julie, I want to come your way. So those that are unfamiliar with the Ignition Garage, tell us a little bit about what it is you do over there.
Hi, so we have kind of multifaceted. We have a retail shop that sells vinyl, CDs, cassette tapes, record players, and then by evening we have live performances. So we were lucky enough to at least have the retail shop to help support us after the shows were canceled or postponed. But for the most part, we're just a nice hub for musicians that travel. And we do some local shows as well. So.
Great, good. Thank you, Julie. I look forward to hearing more about your story. And Craig, let me come your way. Certainly we've seen and heard a little bit about Premier Arts, but for those who aren't familiar with it, help us understand what you do over there.
Sure, we're the resident theater in the beautiful historic Lerner Theater in downtown Elkhart. And so we live here and are able to produce out of the Lerner. And so we do probably 10 shows a year that are really surrounded around a family experience. And during the pandemic, we didn't stop working one day, which was kind of crazy. We kind of pivoted and took a lot of our performances outside, never laid anyone off. We're really well situated in that moment to have a little financial cushion that could keep us going. But now we're back to normal. Everybody uses air quotes with the normal, right? So we're back to normal for the summer and hopefully beyond.
Great. Well, thank you, Craig, and look forward to chatting a little bit more about that. Aaron, I want to come your way, just talk a little bit about just the arts in general. And as we've, talked on other shows with other industries about how they've been impacted by the pandemic. So you mentioned, for example, doing, 200 different, things over the course of the year. Take us back to March of last year when things are going really well. You've put your plan together for the year, and all of a sudden this thing called a global pandemic, comes on board. Tell us what's thinking and what you go through when this happens.
Sure, and I think hindsight's 2020 as far as that goes, because when we heard global pandemic, I don't think any of us knew what that was going to mean. A lot of us thought, a week or two, maybe a month, but then we'll get back to normal. But I think as we got more and more through March into April. We had just finished a very successful run of an August Wilson play with a lot of educational, touring and things like that. And we had an event on a Thursday night, and we were like, okay, what happens tomorrow? What are we going to have to do to prepare for this? And we had just started contracting some New York and Chicago actors for our production of West Side Story that was going to be in like April, May. And everything just ground to a stop without really the certainty of when it was going to come back. And I think when you talk about the arts, it's important to distinguish a little bit between the performing arts and the visual arts, because the performing arts is you're performing in front of an audience, and that interaction is essential to what the performance is. So the performing arts, when distancing and masking and quarantine and all of those things are happening, you can't perform in front of an audience. And that is kind of a really disturbing reality that you have to navigate. So, we've, again, like, Craig was talking about, virtual events, trying to do that kind of stuff. But at least now in hindsight, that's really not essentially what we do. And so we found, talking economically, because that's what this program is about, we were losing money on virtual programming because there's screen fatigue. There's just that acknowledgement that what we do isn't perfectly replicated when there's not that dynamic of a live audience. That has really impacted for now, 15 months, that our whole business model. And so in hindsight, I don't think anyone would have anticipated, except maybe, an epidemiologist who understands how global pandemics work. But, I thought 6 months, and then I thought 9 months, and then I thought, oh my God, when we get to 2021, everything will get better. But I think that was just all us trying to feel better about it. And I've said to a lot of people, 2021 is harder than 2020 because we have to restart something that has stopped. And now that the CDC has given us new guidelines, I think it is going to be easier now to resume, or at least, restart, resurrect, however you want to call that, the performing arts. Yep. Roundabout answer, but that's kind of how we've been navigating.
No, that's great. Julie, I want to come your way, because much like Aaron and Craig have both indicated, you've got to have people come through your door, and so you need them in two different ways, right? You need your retail store to have customers, and most retail was significantly limited by the pandemic, but you also need people to come watch the kind of the performing arts piece of this. Talk a little bit about how you navigated kind of those first few months there.
Well, the first few months we were completely shut down. So I started doing appointments, and thank God for the local community here in Goshen, Michiana area. I've had a lot of people support us in other ways. We even got a small $5,000 donation given to us by a local couple, which was very much appreciated. I really hate to say that retail has actually been really great for us during the pandemic. I think a lot of people were staying home, listening to music, listening to vinyl. That really helped us out. We're really grateful for that. But it really resonates with something that Aaron just said about 2021 being harder than, or this year being harder than 2020. Is now we have people who are fatigued, maybe, who are a little maybe shy about getting back to coming to shows, are unsure, what restrictions are going to be in place. So I am nervous to get back to shows just because of the last year and a half and what everybody's been through, losing family members, myself. So I'm also really excited. I miss live music. I miss live performances. I miss interacting with musicians and music appreciators. So we'll just have to see what happens.
Yep. Craig, I want to follow up with what Julie was talking there about consumer behaviors, obviously changing. We all got used to, doing some things differently. What are you anticipating, this year on the consumer side with the behavior? Is there sort of pent up demand and people are going to rush out and want to again and enjoy the performing arts? Do you think it's a slow open as people are sort of getting used to being back around other people? What's your prediction on that?
Ooh, a prediction. Those are always dangerous.
Yeah.
But I do, throughout the whole pandemic, I kept hoping or feeling as though when things open again, that there would be this new renaissance of people hungry for theater and hungry for communion, if you will, with others. And so one of the things that we did was we looked at our history and we chose the highest grossing premiere art show ever, which is Grease, which is what we're doing this summer. So we're hoping that lightning strikes twice with that, and that people, and what we're seeing so far is that people are really, now that the CDC has lifted or the local health department has lifted our restrictions at the Learner. We were in a pod situation, which was hard to navigate, hard to understand. You weren't very happy because you weren't in your regular seat. But now it's wide open and vaccinated folks can come unmasked. And so we're getting a lot of real positive feedback about that. And so we're hopeful that the summer and beyond is more successful than ever because people really want it.
Right. Craig, I want to stay with you for a quick second too, and follow up, because you mentioned in the opening when we were chatting about, you did, what you could to be open, to continue to provide plays, to shift, to, kind of pivot. Maybe expand a little bit on some of those things and the precautions that, the things you did to try to keep patrons coming, and what patrons' comfort was in terms of coming and experiencing, live theater.
Sure. So when everything kind of shut down, we had just finished a very successful production of Shrek the musical, and instantly, like within the 2 days of the schools going virtual and all of that, we shifted all of our educational programming online and offered free enrichment segments every day for school-age children. Our costume shop went into mask making mode. And so we farmed out fabric and supplies and had people all over the county making masks for the hospitals. And then we thought, well, we can't stop. We got to keep going. But how do you do that? And so we were lucky enough to partner with the Wellfield Garden here in Elkhart and took all of our programming outside. It just so happened that on the schedule was Moana and Mamma Mia. Both shows fit perfectly in a natural outdoor landscape. And so though we could seat, I think they seat like 600 people in that garden in normal times, we limited it to 250 and did more performances. And so people could spread out. They could feel free to wear a mask or not because they were outside. And so, so we stopped in March, and that was like June, July, August. And so by then people were really hungry for live theater. And so our numbers were really pretty good. Not normal by any stretch of the imagination, but the audience was maybe the most appreciative audience we've ever had, just because it was finally just a little taste of what they remembered and what they had missed. So we were lucky to have that partner, that beautiful setting. And, the Wellfield is gorgeous. If you've not been there, you need to. And so though we didn't make quite as much money as as typical, we could still kind of keep going.
Great. Aaron, I want to come back your way. I want to chat maybe some of the economics. When I read, and I don't pretend to understand how theaters operate, but when I'm looking a little bit at the performing arts, it sounds like a big portion of revenue normally comes from patrons walking through the door and buying a ticket to see the event, and obviously some comes from grants or generous donors or other things. So without having to go into specific financial details, I'm not asking that, but help us just understand the economics of this and why like no live performances, for example, has such a devastating impact, and what you did to try to help replace that revenue.
Yeah, I mean, we handled it differently than Premier Arts because we were in a position that we actually did furlough for about 5 months. And we did that just because we weren't producing, and that producing income was what was going to keep our payroll. We operate usually around 55, 45, 55 being contributed income, and 45 being earned income. You know, in a year like 2020, that was more like 90, 10. Where there was a lot of contributed income. And I just want to do a shout out to all of our donors and sponsors and patrons and all of the supporters of the Civic that really did go the extra mile in a year that they knew that we were suffering, and help that. And also PPP, you know, the payroll protection plan allowed us to keep our staff on for another 2 months as we were kind of visioning forward for, like I said, hindsight 2020. We thought we were going to be able to do a lot of events at the end of the year, and we just needed to struggle forward. So, you know, we kept everybody, even though we weren't producing until the end of June. And then we found from the numbers we were looking at that there was just too much risk to continue producing, more because of our volunteers not wanting to put them at risk, the performers, than the patrons. So I guess that, you know, 55, 45 to 90, 10, as far as a split of where the revenue is coming from is a huge impact. You know, we did get some additional help from the Indiana Arts Commission, you know, so shout out to them. Shout out to our community foundation here in St. Joseph County. I know Craig gets as funding, I'm sure, from the Elgar County Community Foundation. So a lot of additional contributions as opposed to patronage. And now that we're getting back to a busy summer, you know, we're getting back to outdoor performances now just in a couple weeks in Mishawaka, and then again in the parks in South Bend as well. We hope that revenue will start to come back to those levels, those pre-2020 levels. As far as best practice, I would love our organization to eventually come to a 60-40, where it's 60% contributed and 40% earned. You know, I know that there's some organizations that are like 80-20, and that's how they like to be. They're incredibly endowed. They're incredibly supported by grants and, you know, federal support and large donors. You know, I think 60-40 for the Civic, at least, is where we eventually want to be.
Great. Julie, I want to come your way because I'm thinking about the folks that are doing live music in your venue. Obviously, they're relying. My guess is they're more of a independent contractors sort of thing, not employees. Many of them relying on these performances to make a living. Talk to us a little bit about just sort of the artists that are part of the activity there, and what they've done to adapt this last year.
Well, we started off thinking maybe we would do some live streaming. That just we didn't have the equipment to really pull that off without, you know, investing more money. That wasn't really a position we were in at the time. Most of the musicians that come through our business, they're touring, they're nationally touring acts. So a lot of people have had to do their own live streams, or I don't know. Some of them had to even get real jobs, as their parents would say. So my main goal for Ignition was that we would make it through and be able to give them a place to play when this was over. So it makes me sad to think about the places that didn't make it, but I'm happy that we're still here and we are going to be able to get them back on the payroll, so to speak. So.
Great. Julie, I want to stay with you. Just one other thought on music. So, you know, as we've talked to some other industries, they've talked about, you know, the pandemic maybe has caused some people in that industry to choose another career and profession and maybe never come back. Let's say you're working in hospitality and you didn't want to work in a industry maybe that was fragile. Do you think, will this have a long-term impact on musicians? Will some of them have left the industry and decided to get that real job, or is there hope that they'll come back to this as we're getting back to normal here?
I actually just talked to one of those people yesterday, and though they are optimistic about the future, they, for right now, are taking some time to reflect on their own lives. And I'm sure they're not alone. I'm sure there are a lot of people doing that right now. In the same sense, I would like to think that there were a lot of people that were stuck at home making a ton of music and able to maybe be more creative or have more time than they would have otherwise. So hopefully there'll be some more emerging artists coming as well.
Great. Craig, we're in our last 5 minutes or so here, and so I want to come your way, and I want to think a little bit about. I don't know if lessons learned is the right question or whatever, but will what you've gone through this last year cause you to act differently going forward? Will you have learned lessons that how will this change, or maybe it won't, your industry going forward?
Well, yeah, I mean, everybody's been changed by the pandemic and the social things that have been going on. I think, the artists are kind of called on to be a mirror, if you will, for society. And so I think that what you're going to see is a lot more diverse amounts of work from diverse populations and a new way of thinking. We've always had kind of a colorblind casting situation at Premier Arts, and I know South Bend Civic is a leader in diversity as well. And so opening our minds to different and how things can be not the way they always were. I think we have a license to do that. And in a renaissance, which I'm still predicting, that's going to be maybe more prevalent than ever, and giving people opportunities to shine. I mean, we're looking at upping our program, doing a lot more work, and encouraging a lot more people to, spark that creative spirit within them. You asked Julie about people who maybe hung up their guitar during the pandemic. I think that once music and theater and dance are in you, you might give it a rest, but it never goes away. And so those people will be back on the boards before you know it.
Great, thanks, Craig. Aaron, I want to ask, sort of similar question. You've worked to pivot and such and react, and now we're planning this emergence. As the pandemic is going away. How will South Bend Civic be different going forward?
I agree a lot with Craig that I really do feel like, just like in the 1918 pandemic, that turned into the Roaring 20s. I do feel like that same kind of cultural just upheaval, wonderful explosion is going to happen. As far as how we're going to be different, I've been able to kind of shift my staffing around a bit because, as people either have found other opportunities during the furlough, or as people have moved or started new chapters, I'll be kind of reworking what my people can do and how we can support our volunteers a little better. We just posted a director of production position, full-time executive position. So I think you will see more opportunity in the arts, I hope, as people start hiring again, because I think that's important. As again, an economic program, the arts are responsible for a lot of jobs, and just like in the RV industry, it's not just the job itself, but it's the jobs that trickle down from those organizations and from the activities that are created by those organizations, whether that be restaurants or entertainment or shopping and all those kind of things, right? I think, to Craig's point too, telling our city's stories in a more proactive way. We are the South Bend Civic Theater. So I think in that name, we have a mandate to tell South Bend's stories, or stories that are resonant to South Bend's population. And I'm really working hard to try to do that. And one of the things I've been working on too is not just telling stories grounded on trauma, and especially after we've all gone through collective trauma, finding stories that celebrate joy and celebrate underrepresented joy is really important to our organization as well. And that was a bit of a wake-up call to say, if you're only telling stories of trauma, you're almost continuing the problems that already exist. So there's a lot of work to be done, and I think that requires organizations to diversify every part of their organization, not just the stage, but your board, your staff, everyone.
Julie, about 30 seconds. What should people know about this summer and coming to Ignition Garage?
So happy you asked. We just finalized our first show back. It's going to be July 20th. So it's just right around the corner for us. We have 14 shows to get rescheduled. So we're going to be pretty busy. So most of it probably in the fall, but just really excited to get back to it.
Great. Well, thanks. We'll look forward to getting people out there. How about you, Craig? What 30 seconds? What should folks expect this summer from Premier Arts?
We have a Lullaby of Broadway musical review featuring great music from Broadway in June, late June. And in July, we have Grease and an all youth production of Grease as well. So two productions of Grease. And so, yeah, lots of things to look forward to here at Premier Arts. Check the website out and get your tickets.
Great. And Aaron, I'll give you the last word, about 30 seconds on what to expect this summer at Southland Civic.
Sure, we got 3 months of outdoor productions. June in Mishawaka at Central Park, SpongeBob SquarePants, or the SpongeBob musical as it's called. July, we're doing Xanadu the musical at Howard Park here in South Bend, which is a great comedy musical. And then finally in August, we're doing a new play called Cry It Out, about young mothers trying to kind of navigate the world of new motherhood. It's a kind of comic show that's going to be in Leaper Park there in the north side of downtown. So 3 shows, 3 months, all outdoors. It should be great.
Great. Well, thank you all 3 of you for the great work you're doing and on performing arts. So the 3 great folks to have in our community. Appreciate it. And we look forward to enjoying those great events this summer. Thanks for coming today to talk a little bit about all of that. So
Thank you.
that's it for our show today. So thank you for watching on WNIT or listening to our podcast. To watch this episode again or any of our past episodes, you can find Economic Outlook at WNIT.org or find our podcast on most major podcast platforms. We also encourage you to like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter. I'm Jeff Ray. I'll see you next week.
This WNIT local production has been made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.